Ethan Walker had always been the type of person who gave his all, especially when it came to his career. At 29, he had already made a name for himself as one of the most dedicated and capable project managers at Redwood Solutions, a rapidly growing tech consulting firm based in San Francisco. It wasn't just that Ethan was good at his job, he was exceptional. From the moment he started at Redwood as a bright-eyed intern, he had proven his worth time and time again, quickly moving up the ranks. There was no task too small or too big for Ethan to take on. He was the one everyone turned to when things got complicated, and he loved it. It was his dream job, and he was convinced that if he kept pushing forward, he'd soon be leading his own team, taking on larger projects, and eventually becoming a key player in the firm's success. Redwood Solutions was known for its fast-paced, high-performance culture. They thrived on competition, innovation, and perfection. The company had grown rapidly over the years, attracting major clients in the tech and startup sectors. But with this success came immense pressure. Employees were expected to work long hours, meet strict deadlines, and deliver results without fail. Mediocrity was not tolerated. Everyone was expected to excel, and Ethan was no exception. He was often the first to arrive and the last to leave, balancing meetings, client demands, and his team's needs, all while trying to keep up with the constantly shifting priorities that seemed to come with every project. Despite the pressure, Ethan loved the work. Every challenge was an opportunity to prove his worth, and every successful project brought him closer to the promotion he had been working toward. He had always believed that hard work would lead to success, that dedication and loyalty to the company would eventually pay off. And for the most part, it had. He had built a strong rapport with his colleagues, earning their respect, and he had delivered countless successful projects that had cemented his reputation as someone you could count on when things got tough. One particular project had recently taken his career to the next level. The company had landed a high-profile client, a tech startup looking to launch their flagship product internationally. This was a major deal for Redwood, and Ethan had been tapped to lead the project. The stakes were high, and he knew this was his moment to shine. He was given full responsibility for managing the client's expectations, coordinating with various departments, and overseeing the entire launch. It was the kind of opportunity he had dreamed of since joining Redwood. Ethan threw himself into the project with everything he had. He worked tirelessly to ensure every detail was perfect, from financial projections to the marketing strategy. His team was smaller than usual, but he trusted them implicitly. The long hours and late nights became routine. Ethan had no problem with the sacrifice. He was convinced that the project's success would not only make the client happy, but also secure his place as one of the firm's top leaders. This project had the potential to catapult him into the management ranks, and he wasn't going to let anything stand in his way. But as the pressure mounted, so did the small cracks in his usually calm and collected exterior. Ethan found himself missing personal events, birthdays, dinners, with friends, weekends away. Yet, despite this, he was confident in his path. He had given his all to Redwood, and this project would prove that he was ready for more. Little did he know his dedication to the company would soon lead him to an unexpected crossroads, one that would change everything. In the final days leading up to the presentation, Ethan had his eyes set on perfection. Every detail, every number, every line of the report had to be flawless. He knew that the client, one of the biggest Redwood had ever secured, would be watching closely. Ethan was determined not to disappoint. His ambition was the driving force behind his success, but it was also what would ultimately lead to his downfall. The final days leading up to the big presentation felt like a whirlwind to Ethan. Every moment was spent perfecting every slide, checking every number, and rehearsing every line of his presentation. The weight of the responsibility hung over him like a heavy cloud. This was the moment he had been waiting for, and he couldn't afford to slip up. The stakes were too high, the expectations too great. The client was known for being demanding, and this project was crucial to the future of Redwood Solutions. Ethan had worked tirelessly for weeks, but the closer the presentation came, the more the pressure mounted. Despite the late nights and constant hustle, Ethan was confident he had anticipated every question, every possible issue. He had gone over the financial model so many times that the numbers felt ingrained in his mind. His team had worked hard under his leadership, and they were ready. There was no room for error. He had to be flawless. This was his shot, and he wasn't about to let anything ruin it. But as with many high-pressure moments, it only took one small misstep for everything to unravel. It happened in the final hours before the presentation. Ethan was reviewing the last-minute changes to the financial projections. Everything was looking good. He double-checked the numbers, one last time, running the spreadsheet through every formula to make sure it was accurate. But in his fatigue, he made a small mistake. It was nothing more than a misplaced decimal point. One small number in a sea of data. The impact wasn't immediately obvious, but when Ethan ran the projection again, he noticed that the figures were off. In the grand scheme of things, it seemed like a minor error, one that could easily be corrected before the presentation. But Ethan, feeling the pressure of time and deadlines closing in, decided to move forward without fixing it. He figured it wouldn't be noticed. After all, the rest of the data was solid and the overall pitch was strong. The team had worked on the creative side of things, ensuring the client's vision was clear and their needs were met. He trusted that the bigger picture would outweigh the small glitch in the financials. He moved forward with the presentation, confident that he could address any concerns that might come up. The next morning, the team arrived early to set up for the presentation. The room was sleek, professional, and buzzing with energy. Ethan was a bundle of nerves as he reviewed his slides one final time. Everything was in place, everything except for that one small error in the financials. But he pushed it to the back of his mind, determined to nail the rest of the pitch. The client was going to love it. He was sure of it. When the client meeting finally began, everything went smoothly. Ethan was in his element, speaking with confidence, answering questions, and leading his team through the presentation. But then, when they got to the financial projections, the room fell silent. The client's eyes narrowed as they studied the numbers on the screen. Ethan's heart skipped a beat as he watched them exchange glances, their eyes shifting from the screen to Ethan and back again. There was an unspoken tension in the air. Finally, one of the senior executives from the client side raised a hand. "Ethan, could you explain the discrepancy in the numbers here? The figures don't match up with what we discussed last week." Ethan's stomach dropped. He had hoped that no one would notice, but there it was, his mistake glaring in front of him. He scrambled to find an explanation, offering a quick response about potential rounding issues, but it was clear that the client wasn't satisfied. There was a pause, a moment, where time seemed to stand still. Ethan could feel the eyes of his team on him, could sense the unease creeping into the room. He fumbled through the presentation, trying to recover, but the damage was done. The client's response was polite, but the cracks were starting to show. "We'll need to review this further," they said, their tone more reserved now. "We appreciate the effort, but we'll need to ensure everything aligns before moving forward." Ethan did his best to salvage the situation, but the damage had been done. The small mistake, the missed decimal point, had overshadowed everything else. The client left the meeting without a firm commitment, and the room quickly emptied. Ethan felt the weight of the moment crash over him. The project he had poured his heart into, the one that was supposed to propel him forward in his career, was now in jeopardy because of a single tiny error. And worse, he knew that it wasn't just the client who had noticed. The higher-ups at Redwood Solutions would certainly hear about it. In the days that followed, the feedback from the client came back lukewarm at best. There was no mention of canceling the project outright, but the enthusiasm that had once been present had cooled. Ethan was left wondering if the project could be saved. He kept replaying the events in his head, wondering if he could have caught the mistake sooner, or if he should have done more to fix it before the presentation. Every scenario played out in his mind, but there was no turning back. Ethan's mistake wasn't a fatal flaw. It was a small human error that anyone could make. But in the high-stakes world of consulting, where every detail counts, it was enough to cause a ripple effect that threatened to undo everything he had worked for. And what hurt the most was not just the mistake itself, but the looming uncertainty that followed it. What would the higher-ups think? What would the leadership at Redwood Solutions do when they found out? It wasn't just about the mistake. It was about everything he had worked for, the years of loyalty, the sacrifices he had made. In that moment, Ethan knew that the consequences of this small error would be far more significant than he had ever imagined. He didn't just lose the client. He lost his sense of security, his place in a company that had been his home for so long. The road ahead now seemed uncertain, but one thing was clear: the fallout from this mistake was just the beginning. Ethan sat in his apartment that evening, the lights dimmed low, staring blankly at the stack of paperwork on his coffee table. His mind raced as he replayed the events of the day. No, the past few days in a loop. Fired. A small mistake, One simple decimal point in an ocean of numbers, and he was out. He had never imagined this outcome, not after everything he had done for Redwood Solutions. The sting of the firing still sat heavily in his chest, but with it, something else began to creep in clarity. This was a setback, a temporary one, and now it was time to turn things around. As much as the firing felt like a punch to the gut, Ethan knew it didn't have to define him. It was just one chapter in his story. But this story, this next chapter, was going to be different. He wasn't going to walk away with his head down, sulking in defeat. No, he was going to show Redwood Solutions and everyone else that one mistake didn't have to be his downfall. In fact, it could be the catalyst for something far greater. It was time to get back at them, not by seeking revenge in the traditional sense, but by building something so successful, so undeniable, that they would regret ever letting him go. The idea came to him slowly, a whisper in the back of his mind that grew louder and clearer by the minute Adams Consulting. He would start his own firm, one built on the same principles he had learned at Redwood, but without the toxic culture of perfectionism and fear of failure. He would offer the kind of personalized service and creative solutions that companies like Redwood only pretended to provide. The more he thought about it, the more excited he became. Not only would this be a chance to prove his worth, but it would also be an opportunity to create something he could be proud of, something that didn't demand perfection, but celebrated growth and learning from mistakes. Ethan didn't waste any time. The first step was to make a plan, something concrete, something that would give him the structure he needed to build his business. He pulled out his laptop and began drafting the details of Adams Consulting. He knew the industry well, the market and the gaps that Redwood and similar firms left open. Small businesses, startups, and mid-sized companies, those were the clients he wanted to target. They needed someone who could see their unique needs, adapt quickly, and offer innovative solutions without the red tape that came with larger corporations. He didn't have the luxury of a large budget or a corporate backing, but Ethan had something even more valuable: experience. He knew how to get things done, how to build a brand, and how to sell an idea. He also had the benefit of a network of former colleagues, clients, and business partners, people he had worked with over the years, who respected him and the work he had done. They were loyal to him, not the company. With a few calls, he could start assembling the right team, the kind of people who believed in his vision and wanted to help him succeed. Over the next week, Ethan mapped out a business model that would leverage his skills while differentiating himself from the big consulting firms. He focused on 3 key elements that would set Adams Consulting apart from its competition: personalized, client-focused solutions. Unlike Redwood Solutions, which treated every client with a one-size-fits-all approach, Adams Consulting would tailor its services to meet the specific needs of each business. Ethan knew that small and mid-sized businesses wanted to feel like they were more than just another account. On the books, they wanted to feel valued. That was the key: innovation and flexibility. Too many consulting firms relied on rigid methodologies that didn't adapt to the ever-changing needs of their clients. Ethan's firm would focus on providing innovative, creative solutions that were flexible enough to evolve as the business landscape changed. His mantra would be simple: innovation that fits. Learning from mistakes. Instead of punishing clients or employees for mistakes, Adams Consulting would embrace them. Ethan knew firsthand how debilitating the fear of making mistakes could be. In an environment like Redwood's, his firm would be built on the idea that mistakes were part of the learning process, a chance to grow, improve, and innovate. Once the vision was clear, Ethan turned to the practical side of things. He registered the business, created a logo and branding, and set up a website. He also reached out to a handful of key individuals who had worked with him at Redwood, offering them positions at his new firm. He was transparent about his departure and his reasons for starting Adams Consulting, and to his surprise, most of them were eager to join him. They too had seen the flaws in the larger consulting firms, and they were ready to work for a company that valued creativity over conformity. Next, Ethan focused on marketing. He knew that in order to compete with the established firms, he needed to build a strong online presence. He crafted a social media strategy focusing on sharing insights about the consulting industry, showcasing his approach to problem solving, and highlighting the values that would set his business apart. He also began writing blogs and articles, positioning himself as a thought leader in the space. The goal wasn't just to attract clients, it was to build a brand that people could trust and relate to. The first clients came quickly. A few former colleagues from Redwood reached out intrigued by the new approach Ethan was offering. One was a startup in the tech industry that had been struggling to scale. Another was a local boutique that needed help rebranding and marketing itself to a wider audience. Ethan didn't hesitate. He jumped in with both feet, offering the same level of dedication and personal service he had given at Redwood, but this time without the pressure and the fear. The results were immediate. Clients began to see the impact of Ethan's work. Businesses that had felt neglected or misunderstood by the larger firms were now thriving with the personalized creative solutions Ethan provided. Word spread, and slowly but surely, Adams Consulting started gaining traction. As the weeks passed, Ethan's confidence grew. The pain of losing his job at Redwood was still there, but it no longer consumed him. He realized that in many ways, being fired had been the best thing that could have happened. It pushed him to take a leap he might have never taken otherwise. It forced him to see his own potential outside the confines of a corporation that didn't appreciate him. With each client signed, each successful project completed, Ethan's resolve strengthened. He was building something that not only offered success to his clients, but also gave him a sense of purpose. Every day he was proving to himself and to the world that he could succeed on his own terms. It wasn't just about getting back at Redwood Solutions anymore. That was part of it, yes. But now it was about building a business that was truly his own one, that valued innovation, creativity, and human connection over bureaucracy and perfection. And the more Adams Consulting grew, the more he knew he had made the right choice. As weeks turned into months, Ethan began to see the fruits of his labor. Adams Consulting wasn't just a dream, it was quickly becoming a reality. The early successes were satisfying, but Ethan knew that sustaining growth would require more than just hard work. It would require momentum. The company was small, but the passion and drive behind it were undeniable. With each passing day, Ethan worked tirelessly to build a foundation that could support long-term growth. But as the business expanded, so did the challenges. Ethan's first few clients were the type he had hoped for. Small businesses looking for tailored solutions, who appreciated the fresh approach he brought. One of his first clients, a tech startup, struggling to scale, saw immediate results after implementing the marketing strategies Ethan designed. The startup not only gained traction in the market, but also started receiving investor attention. This success story became a case study that Ethan used to gain more clients, attracting other startups and small businesses that were looking for personalized, innovative solutions. However, even with the success stories, Ethan knew that to compete with larger firms like Redwood Solutions, he would need to scale quickly. He couldn't afford to rest on his laurels, not when the market was so competitive. The landscape was changing, and businesses were increasingly demanding more personalized attention, something the larger firms often failed to provide. Adams Consulting had a real advantage in that regard, but it needed to leverage that strength. One of the first steps Ethan took to build momentum was expanding his team. While the initial success had been a product of his hard work, he realized that to truly scale, he couldn't do it alone. He started bringing in talented individuals who shared his vision, people who had experience in different areas, from finance to branding to digital marketing. He wasn't just hiring employees, he was building a family of like-minded professionals who wanted to make a real difference. They worked together to develop new products and services, focusing on areas where larger firms couldn't deliver the same level of service. Ethan's ability to pick the right people and put them in positions where they could excel was key to the growth of the company. One of the first major challenges Ethan faced was managing the growing workload, while still maintaining the personal touch that had been the foundation of his success. As the number of clients increased, so did the demands. There were more meetings to attend, more strategies to develop, and more clients to please. Ethan found himself stretched thin, often working late into the night to ensure everything was on track. But he refused to compromise on the quality of service Adams Consulting provided. He kept the lines of communication open with his team, making sure that each client felt valued and heard. As momentum built, Ethan began to explore new opportunities for growth. He started offering new services that would set Adams Consulting apart from the competition. One of the most successful was a business transformation service which helped clients streamline their operations, reduce inefficiencies, and create scalable growth plans. Many small businesses found themselves struggling with the complexities of scaling, and Ethan knew that offering a comprehensive solution could make a huge impact. With the launch of this new service, the company's client base grew exponentially. Word of mouth spread quickly, and Adams Consulting was soon seen as a go-to provider for businesses looking to innovate and scale. Ethan's reputation as a forward-thinking leader grew, and he was invited to speak at industry events and share his approach to personalized consulting. He became known for his ability to balance big-picture thinking with the necessary attention to detail, a rare skill in the world of consulting. In addition to expanding services, Ethan knew that visibility was crucial for continued growth. He put more effort into building an online presence, investing in digital marketing, and creating content that showcased his expertise. Blogs, webinars, and case studies began to fill the company's website and social media platforms. The goal wasn't just to advertise, it was to create a brand that stood for something Ethan wanted, Adams Consulting to be known for more than just its services. He wanted it to be a symbol of authenticity, creativity, and trust. The more content he produced, the more clients began to take notice. But success came with new challenges. As the team grew, so did the complexity of managing day-to-day operations. Ethan had to delegate more tasks, which was difficult at first. He had always been the one to oversee everything, but he quickly realized that in order to scale, he needed to trust his team and give them the freedom to manage projects independently. This shift in mindset wasn't easy, but it was necessary. He began to rely on his team's expertise, empowering them to make decisions while maintaining the company's overall vision. Despite these growing pains, the results were undeniable. Within 6 months, Adams Consulting had doubled its client base, and Ethan had brought in a few larger contracts that helped stabilize the business for long-term growth. The team was more cohesive than ever, with each person contributing their skills to the greater good. Ethan didn't just want his company to succeed, he wanted the people who worked for him to succeed as well. As the business grew, so did the opportunities for his team, and that was one of the most rewarding aspects of the journey. The real turning point came when a major client, a global retailer, reached out to Adams Consulting. The company had been struggling to modernize its operations and needed help revamping its digital marketing strategy. Ethan knew that landing this client would be a game changer. It was the kind of opportunity he had dreamed of, but it also came with its own set of challenges. The client had high expectations and the project would be a huge undertaking. But Ethan was confident that his team was capable of delivering. They had done it before, and now it was time to prove that Adams Consulting could handle even the most complex and high-profile projects. With the new client on board, the pressure intensified. Ethan threw himself into the project, guiding his team every step of the way. They spent weeks working on the strategy, analyzing the retailer's current operations, and devising a plan that would not only address their pain points, but position them for future success. The work was grueling, but it was also rewarding. The client was impressed with the initial proposals, and by the time the project launched, it was clear that Adams Consulting had once again delivered results. The client signed a long-term contract, solidifying the company's reputation as a leader in innovative consulting solutions. By the end of the year, Adams Consulting had reached a level of success that Ethan had once only dreamed of. They had established themselves as a serious player in the industry, competing with the biggest names in consulting. But the most important takeaway for Ethan was that he had done it on his own terms. He had built a company that didn't just focus on profits or growth, it focused on creating real, sustainable value for clients and employees alike. The momentum was undeniable. Now Ethan had gone from being fired for a small mistake to becoming a business owner with a thriving company. And as Adams Consulting grew, Ethan knew that this was just the beginning. The foundation was laid and the possibilities for the future were endless. As the months passed and Adams Consulting continued to flourish, Ethan couldn't help but notice a shift in the air. While his own company was steadily growing, a new dynamic was unfolding at Redwood Solutions, the firm that had once been his home. In the beginning, the irony had been subtle. He had known from the start that leaving Redwood after that one small mistake was the best thing that could have happened to him. But now, as he watched Redwood's fortunes slowly begin to shift, the irony became more pronounced. It wasn't long before the cracks in Redwood Solutions started to show. The once glamorous consulting giant had become a shadow of its former self. Ethan had been keeping an eye on the industry, reading reports and talking to former colleagues. And what he discovered was hard to ignore. Client satisfaction was dipping, morale within the company was plummeting, and the leadership was scrambling to maintain the facade of stability that had once defined the firm. The company had grown too large too fast, and had failed to adapt to the changing demands of the market. The once cutting-edge services that Redwood Solutions offered were now becoming outdated. Clients began to voice frustrations over the lack of innovation and personalized attention. The firm's rigid corporate culture that had once been its strength was now a liability. Businesses, small startups, tech companies, and entrepreneurs wanted more flexibility, more creativity, and more tailored solutions. And Redwood Solutions just couldn't provide that anymore. They had grown too entrenched in their ways, too focused on maintaining their old model of mass-market consulting. For Ethan, watching it all unfold was a bittersweet experience. He hadn't expected to enjoy seeing Redwood struggle, but there was a sense of vindication in knowing that he had built Adams Consulting as a direct answer to the very issues that were now sinking. Redwood Adams Consulting offered what Redwood could no longer deliver: innovation, personalization, and adaptability. And the more Ethan looked at Redwood's decline, the more he realized that the rigid perfectionism that had led to his own firing was now the very thing that was pushing the company over the edge. What Ethan found particularly ironic was that the same leadership that had let him go for a tiny mistake, the same leadership that had stressed perfection over everything else, was now dealing with far bigger failures. Clients were leaving in droves, and those that remained were increasingly dissatisfied. The company's growth model had been based on huge corporate clients and big projects that now seemed outdated. Meanwhile, Adams Consulting, with its nimble, client-centered approach, had started to take its place in the market. The irony didn't stop there. As Ethan continued to watch from the sidelines, he realized that Redwood's leaders seemed completely unaware of the problem. Claire Dawson, the COO, who had dismissed him so harshly, was still clinging to the old ways, insisting that everything was fine, despite the mounting evidence to the contrary. Richard Hart, the CEO, had started to make vague promises of change, but nothing concrete ever materialized. The leadership was out of touch with the very market they once dominated, and it was becoming painfully clear that they had no idea how to pivot. Ethan heard rumblings from former colleagues about how the management team was now focused on internal issues, firing employees, restructuring departments, and trying to hold on to clients who were increasingly slipping away. It was a far cry from the agile, cutting-edge firm that Redwood had once been. The company had become bogged down by its own size and bureaucracy, and the very things that had made it successful were now the anchors that were holding it back. Meanwhile, Adams Consulting had flourished. Clients who had grown disillusioned with the big firms started reaching out to Ethan for help. They appreciated his innovative approach, his attention to detail, and his willingness to take risks. He wasn't afraid to offer customized solutions, something the larger firms couldn't afford to do. The results spoke for themselves. Startups that had partnered with Adams Consulting began to see measurable improvements in their operations, and word-of-mouth spread. As the business grew, so did Ethan's reputation. Ethan knew that, in the grand scheme of things, this wasn't just about personal revenge. It wasn't about proving that Adams Consulting was better than Redwood Solutions. It was about showing that there was another way, a more human, adaptable, and creative way to run a consulting business. He had always believed that success came from understanding your clients' needs and adapting to them, not forcing them into a rigid mold. Adams Consulting wasn't just an alternative to Redwood Solutions. It was proof that a different approach could work, and work better. By the end of the year, Adams Consulting had doubled its client base and revenue. Ethan had become known as a disruptor in the consulting world, and his firm was one of the fastest growing in the industry. He was invited to speak at conferences, write for industry publications, and was even featured in a few high-profile articles. His journey from being fired for a small mistake to becoming a leader in a thriving business had captured the attention of many. On the other hand, Redwood Solutions was faltering. Ethan's old colleagues, those who had once admired his work ethic and commitment, were now struggling to keep up with the changes in the industry. Clients continued to slip away, and the firm's reputation as a leader in the consulting space began to erode. Despite the leadership's best efforts, it became clear that the company was no longer the powerhouse it once was. The turning point came when Redwood Solutions lost a major client to Adams Consulting. This was a client that Ethan had worked with extensively when he was still at Redwood, a company that had been loyal to them for years. But now they were looking for a more innovative approach to their business transformation, and Adams Consulting was there to provide it. When Ethan heard the news, he couldn't help but feel a sense of quiet satisfaction. It wasn't about gloating, it was about knowing that the things he had fought for, the values he had stood by, were finally being recognized. At a networking event months later, Ethan found himself face to face with Claire Dawson. She looked different, tired, more worn down. The firm's struggles were evident in her appearance, and for a moment, Ethan felt a strange sense of pity. But as they exchanged pleasantries, there was no mistaking the underlying tension. Claire knew just as Ethan did that Adams Consulting was now the future of the industry, and Redwood Solutions was scrambling to catch up. As the conversation came to an end, Ethan couldn't help but smile to himself. He had worked hard, taken risks, and learned from his mistakes. And now as he looked at the company that had once rejected him, he knew that his success wasn't just a personal victory. It was a testament to the power of resilience, adaptability, and the courage to walk away from the familiar in search of something better. Ethan had always believed in the power of hard work resilience and the principle that those who truly dedicated themselves to their craft would eventually succeed. But as Adams Consulting gained more traction in the market as clients signed long-term contracts and the business continued to grow, he began to realize that there was more to success than simply putting in the hours. Success, he had learned, was about finding your own path, something Redwood Solutions had never allowed him to do. And now, with every new victory, with every milestone his firm surpassed, Ethan couldn't help but feel the satisfaction of a quiet but undeniable triumph. When Redwood Solutions lost one of its largest clients to Adams Consulting, the irony of it was hard to ignore. This wasn't just any client. It was one of the very companies that had been a part of the reason he was fired in the first place. Ethan had worked on this client's account back when he was at Redwood. He had cultivated a strong relationship with their team, delivering results that they were happy with. But when that same client reached out to Adams Consulting for help, looking for a fresh approach, Ethan knew it was the culmination of everything he had been working toward. The news of the client switch came to Ethan's desk one morning with an email titled, "Client Transition, Moving Forward with Adams Consulting." As he read through the email, the realization hit him like a wave. This was the moment he had been waiting for. Not for the sake of revenge, but for the validation of his hard work, his vision, and his belief that he could create something better than what he had left behind. The first time he stepped into the office after the news was confirmed, it was like a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. Adams Consulting had officially outgrown Redwood Solutions in this particular area. The client, which had once been so integral to his former company, was now part of his growing portfolio. It was an undeniable shift in power, one that no one at Redwood had seen coming. Ethan's sense of victory wasn't driven by the client or the accolades. It wasn't even about the competitive edge. It was about the opportunity to build something real, something authentic on his own terms. Redwood Solutions had been about climbing the corporate ladder, chasing the next promotion, the next big client. But Adams Consulting was different. It was about fostering genuine relationships, understanding the true needs of his clients, and doing business with integrity and creativity. That was Ethan's vision, and now he was seeing it come to life. He wasn't just a cog in a corporate machine. He was the one driving change, and that realization gave him a sense of pride that no corporate title ever could. One of the more surreal moments in Ethan's journey came when he received an invitation to an industry conference in New York. The conference was a prestigious event filled with thought leaders, top CEOs, and some of the biggest names in the consulting world. But it wasn't the conference itself that left Ethan in awe. It was the fact that Redwood Solutions had also been invited to speak. The very company that had let him go over a minor mistake, the company whose approach to consulting he had rejected, was now on the same stage as his firm. The irony wasn't lost on him. Ethan's speech was a highlight of the conference. He had been invited to speak on the future of consulting, specifically how smaller firms like Adams Consulting were reshaping the landscape by providing personalized, innovative solutions that the larger firms could no longer deliver. Ethan spoke about his journey from being fired for a small mistake to creating a business that was now thriving. He emphasized that success wasn't about perfection. It was about flexibility, adaptability, and the willingness to learn from failure. The crowd responded with genuine enthusiasm, and by the end of his talk, Ethan had made his mark as a thought leader in the industry. Meanwhile, Redwood Solutions was struggling to find its footing. Despite their continued presence in the market, they were no longer the powerhouse they once were. The clients who had remained loyal to them were growing increasingly frustrated with the company's inability to innovate. Employees were jumping ship, leaving for smaller, more agile firms, like Adams Consulting. The news of Redwood Solutions losing another major client, this time one of their oldest, was a final blow. The company's reputation built on a rigid model of perfection and high fees was now in freefall. Ethan didn't take pleasure in seeing Redwood's downfall. He had worked hard at that company, and there were people he still respected there. But he couldn't ignore the satisfaction that came with knowing he had created a company that thrived where Redwood Solutions failed. He wasn't just proving them wrong, he was proving to himself that he could build something real and lasting from the ground up. Months later, when Ethan was invited to a celebratory dinner for Adams Consulting, he looked around the room at his team, at the people who had believed in him from the start. It was a small gathering, just a few close colleagues and clients, but it was one of the most meaningful moments of his career. The work they had done together had led them to this point, and the future seemed limitless. As he raised a glass to his team, Ethan reflected on how far he had come. The mistakes of the past, his firing from Redwood, the uncertainty, the self-doubt had all led him here. The victory was not just about beating his former employer or proving them wrong. It was about the journey, the growth and the lessons learned along the way. It was about knowing that success wasn't just about getting the numbers right. It was about building something that had meaning, that mattered. In the end, Ethan's greatest victory wasn't about a single client or a specific project. It was about the ability to overcome the odds to create a company that thrived on its own terms. And as he looked around at the people who had helped him build that success, he realized that the true triumph was in the relationships he had formed, the trust he had built, and the way Adams Consulting had changed the way business was done. His final laugh wasn't loud or brash. It wasn't about gloating or rubbing his success in anyone's face. It was quiet. It was the satisfaction of knowing that he had proven not just to his former employer, but to himself, that he could make it on his own. That in itself was the ultimate triumph. As the year came to a close, Ethan Walker found himself standing at the edge of a new chapter. Adams Consulting had surpassed his wildest expectations. What had begun as a small idea born from frustration and a sense of being wronged had turned into a thriving business that was reshaping the consulting industry. But Ethan knew that this was just the beginning. The success of the past year didn't just represent a triumph over his former employer, Redwood Solutions. It represented the personal growth he had undergone, the lessons he had learned, and the realization that he was capable of far more than he had ever imagined. Ethan had built Adams Consulting with the understanding that the road to success wasn't going to be easy. The early days were filled with uncertainty, but they had also been filled with purpose. He had taken what was painful, being fired over a small mistake, and turned it into the fuel that pushed him to build something better, something he could truly call his own. But beyond the revenue growth and expanding client list, what mattered most to Ethan was the culture he had fostered within the company. The values he had instilled from the very beginning, innovation, adaptability, and an emphasis on human connection had become the backbone of Adams Consulting. One of the most rewarding aspects of this journey was seeing his team flourish alongside him. What began as a small group of like-minded professionals had grown into a well-established firm. The people who had joined him in the early days had become an integral part of the company's success, each person bringing their unique skills and passion to the table. Ethan didn't just want his business to succeed, he wanted his team to succeed too. He made sure they had the tools, the freedom, and the support they needed to excel, and in return, the company had thrived. As Adams Consulting gained recognition in the industry, Ethan was approached with more opportunities, partnerships with other firms, invitations to speak at conferences, and even offers from investors looking to fund the next phase of growth. It was tempting, of course, but Ethan knew that the foundation of his success had always been built on personal connection, authenticity, and the freedom to make decisions that were right for both his clients and his team. The last thing he wanted was to lose sight of that. He wasn't interested in scaling so rapidly that the essence of what made Adams Consulting special was lost. Instead, Ethan focused on building a sustainable future for the firm, one that didn't rely on the whims of investors or the need to chase after every opportunity that came his way. He had learned from his experience at Redwood Solutions that growth for the sake of growth wasn't always the right path. He had seen firsthand how a company could lose its identity by prioritizing profit and scale over people and values. He didn't want Adams Consulting to fall into that trap. In the next phase of the company's journey, Ethan began to explore ways to create a more meaningful impact. He started offering pro bono consulting to startups that couldn't afford traditional consulting services, but had the potential to become great. He made it a point to mentor young entrepreneurs and share his knowledge of building a business from the ground up. Adams Consulting wasn't just a firm focused on helping businesses grow. It was a hub for innovation mentorship and community building. Ethan knew that by giving back and fostering the next generation of entrepreneurs, he was not only doing good in the world, but also setting up his company for long-term success. The road ahead was filled with potential. Ethan had seen how far he had come, and yet he knew there was still so much more to do. He wasn't interested in being complacent. He understood that the business world was always changing, and he had to continue to evolve if he wanted Adams Consulting to remain competitive. Innovation would always be at the heart of the company. But Ethan also understood the importance of maintaining a balance between growth and quality. He had seen businesses expand too quickly, lose touch with their clients, and crumble under the weight of their own success. That wasn't going to happen to Adams Consulting. In many ways, this journey had come full circle. Ethan had gone from being a fired employee, disillusioned by a small mistake, to a business owner with a thriving company. But the transformation wasn't just external, it was internal, too. Ethan had learned to trust his instincts, to believe in his ability to lead, and to value the process of building something meaningful over the quick wins of short-term success. He had built Adams Consulting on his own terms, and now he was determined to continue shaping its future with the same authenticity and purpose that had brought him this far. Looking out over the city from his office window, Ethan felt a sense of calm he hadn't experienced in years. The challenges had been tough, but they had made him stronger, wiser, and more confident in his decisions. He had gone from fearing failure to embracing it as a natural part of growth. The mistakes, the setbacks, the moments of doubt, they had all been part of the journey, and now they were part of his story. As he looked ahead to the future, Ethan couldn't help but feel grateful for the path he had taken. If he had never been fired, if he had never faced that tiny mistake that had sent him on this journey, he wouldn't be where he was today. He had learned that the hardest moments often lead to the greatest breakthroughs. And now, with Adams Consulting on solid ground, Ethan was ready for whatever came next. The future was bright, and Ethan knew that this was just the beginning.